need to introduce the Baroness Cox, who's with us today, but her story, her journey, how just her journey of life. She has done a lot, not just that she's in her 80s, but that she's in her 80s still doing so much, but has done so much up to this point. And I wanted to try to tap into a theme that we haven't really talked much about together. We have in private for a few minutes, but I wanted to turn this into something that was available to others. And that is a theme of women's rights, women's empowerment. And again, you have seen so much and you've been involved in so much. I just think you have some things to share with people. And so whether you're going up into the land of like historical perspective on women's rights, or also going into some personal experiences, I would just love for people to hear from you a little bit and just for you to share your view of, one person said, to right the wrongs in the earth, we just need to create equality between men and women, and the earth will be a brand new place. So pretty big idea. But
yep.
What say you?
Well, I think I'd rather not go into history because anyone can study the history. I'd rather share the lovely Christian phrase, the sacrament of the present moment. And I'd like to use the sacrament of the present moment. And what I'd love to do in the precious time I have with you is to give just maybe, see how time goes, but one example of how women have actually changed situations. Our little charity Heart, we work with people suffering from oppression and persecution in conflict or post-conflict zones and places where other people don't go for political reasons. They're not allowed to go, so we cross borders illegally if we have to, for logistical reasons because they're hard to reach, and for security reasons. And so we do work with people in very remote and often conflict-ridden places. So I'd love to give one example, I've got plenty more, but where women have been transformational in the very, very remote areas in the jungle in northwestern Burma. An amazing story. And that's women's empowerment and women empowering women. So I'd like to give one example of that. And I'd like to say a little bit, if it's appropriate, about my concern in this country, and especially from Muslim women suffering from Sharia law in this country, where for many of them, they really are denied their rights in ways that make our suffragettes turn in their graves. So if we could start off with those two, and maybe it'll take the time, because I think both will illustrate, if you like, the bigger picture. Is that okay? Well,
that's perfect. That's beautiful. Yes.
Well, in that case, I'll invite you to join with me as we travel to the very, very remote jungle hill tribes area of northwest Burma in Shin State. It's on the border with India, and it really is remote area stuff. And our wonderful partner there and partners, I won't go into the history of it, but they have set up a program for providing training for health workers in an area where there was no healthcare whatever. And kids would die of diarrhea, which is a quick killer if you don't treat it. There was malaria and so on. And they have an amazing program where they trained local community health workers who saved the lives of 8 out of 10 people who would otherwise have died. Because the killers really in that kind of remote area are treatable or preventable. Malaria, diarrhea, septicemia from cutting something with a rusty blade. And these are preventable. People will die of old age or they'll die of cancer in remote areas, but the main killers are these. And they do save the lives of 8 out of 10 people. They've now trained 1,000 community health workers, and they reach a catchment area of 250,000, saving the lives of 8 out of 10 people who would otherwise have died in those remote areas. That's wonderful. But the theme I really want to look at is women helping women. I'm not as community health workers are women, but childbirth and antenatal care and postnatal care are critical. And in remote areas, not just in that part of Burma, I call it Burma, not Myanmar, because the local people prefer that. There was no midwifery training. They have, as they have in many parts of the world, what they call traditional birth attendants. And they've not been taught anything. They mean well, they're kind, they're caring, but nobody's taught them anything about safe practice. And so the maternity death rate is very high, and the infant mortality rate is also high. And for example, they would cut the umbilical cord with rusty scissors. They wouldn't know any better. They weren't trained, and they certainly wouldn't not to know with breech deliveries and things like that. So great friend of mine, we work with quite a lot in Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh and so on. She's a highly qualified midwifery nurse specialist. And we talked about this, and she took 2 other midwifery colleagues with her out there, and they took 17 hours on motorbikes through the jungle with a great precipice on one side. I don't know vehicle. Great precipice on one side, cliff on the other, and really rough, steep stuff. 17 hours on motorbikes to get there. And they trained the local traditional birth attendants, TBAs, and they went 2 or 3 times, and the TBAs became very competent, very eager, very good practitioners, and they also spread it to other practitioners throughout the jungle. And now I'm happy to say that the orphanage, which has been there since time immemorial for the kids whose mothers had died in childbirth, has now been closed. So they have really raised the standard, the safety, and the whole concept of good maternity and infant childcare in remote parts of jungle. And that, I think, is a wonderful example of women empowering women in life-saving ways. And we could give other examples in other parts of the world. But that's one example. I say plenty more I could offer. Shifting the tack a little bit, then I'll take questions if anyone wants to ask any questions, is back in my own country, in the UK, I'm very, very worried, and I think some of this might apply in the States as well, that I think it's probably patchy in the United States, but in Britain, we do have Sharia law operating in many of our high sort of population Muslim communities. Now, Sharia law is meant to be operating under the auspices of British law, UK law, but in the high density communities, it is practiced as such. And it affects particularly, one example, women. And that under Sharia law, if you marry with Sharia law without a legally registered marriage, and most of them are not legally registered because the women think, well, they're getting married in Britain and it'll be as it should be. But if they are married with Sharia and not legally registered, the man can just say, I divorce you 3 times, and the divorce takes place. And one woman came to me in tears, cried on my shoulder, and said her husband had actually sent the divorce through the post, just opened this and said, I divorced you 3 times. She went to her imam and he said, yeah, you are divorced. And these women then are left with nothing because they have no civil rights, and they're often ostracized by the community, and they have no property, and they're devastated and destitute. And a lot of them come to see me, and we wept together, and I've raised this in Parliament again and again. I've got private members' bills trying to get them through Parliament, but so far without success, which would make it legally a requirement that every religious marriage is also legally registered. And that would provide them the protection they need if a man divorces them. And so these women, I've written about it quite a lot, I've spoken about it in Parliament, these women in Britain are suffering in ways which are utterly, utterly unacceptable, which I said earlier would make the suffragettes turn in their graves. So I do a lot of work with the Muslim women, the Muslim Women's Advisory Council, they're very able, and 1 or 2 of them are lawyers, and we really are trying to put pressure on the British government to bring in this legislation to give them that protection of having a civil marriage as well as a religious marriage. So far, we haven't succeeded. And this is a battle we're really fighting. And I think it's appalling that the British government has not accepted it. So we're continuing to fight that battle. But that is a thing where gender inequality in Britain is causing huge suffering.
And
so 2 examples, gender achievements in Burma and gender inequality and suffering in the UK.
Yeah, what would that protection look like? So if the British government recognized that inequality, women being put out of a marriage, what kind of protection would be provided? Like what's missing currently that you see?
Well, if you have married under civil law, well, you have rights. So if you're divorced, you have rights to property, rights to children's, or that would be decided in the interest of the child who has childcare. But you've got a lot of legally recognized rights. And a lot of Muslim countries actually do have this. I think Pakistan, which is a very high intensity Muslim country, I think even there, the rights of women are respected in that when they have a religious marriage, it's also legally recognized. So it is very off-piste for Britain to be where it is. But the women who come to see me just are in desperation, and some are even suicidal.
Is the
So,
culture aware? Like, do you think there's a widespread knowledge within the UK that this is happening, or is it pretty hidden?
well, I've certainly raised it in Parliament, and it's well known in Parliament, and a lot of people support the private members' bill, support the Muslim women. But the problem is getting legal reform. And I'm told it's very difficult to change the marriage acts of the past. Well,
Yeah.
and I'm not a lawyer, but I can't think it's impossible. And one of these sort of anomalies, the legal anomalies, is that I think it was, I have to check this, I haven't talked about this for a little while, I think it's 1949, but some of that kind of era. Then there were three religious marriages which do become legally registered. I think it's Anglican, well, the sort of Christian, Anglican, Roman Catholic, and so on, the Jews, and one other group. So it's so anomalous. It's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
the women are suffering. And so that's gender inequality in the UK, which I feel passionately about. And passionately for the women. And the other sort of variations on that theme, a friend of mine is a gynecologist. And he described how a 63-year-old man brought his 23-year-old wife, and forgive the anatomy here, but to have repair of hymen, which is actually an illegal operation unless you need it for medical reasons. So my friend, said, no, I'm sorry, I can't. It's illegal. And he said, why do you want it done anyway? So the 63-year-old man said, I want to take my wife, 23-year-olds, back to Pakistan, marry her to another man. He'll get a visa to come to Britain, and I get £10,000 for doing that.
Wow.
Now, we don't know how much that's going on, but there's a very serious sort of but a very serious, not widely reported or acknowledged problem of gender inequality or gender abuse, I would say, for many women in Britain. And it'd be very interesting to know if some parts of the states also have a similar situation.
Yeah.
But it's a big issue. And I got a lot of support for it from all different parts of the House, from top lawyers and so on. But sometimes to get governments to move is a challenge.
And what is that like for you engaging? So when you see something that's out of balance, that's a direct representation of injustice, oppression on some level, how do you engage? How do you start climbing that mountain? Because it looks like, I would imagine, even in the example you're giving with Sharia law in the UK, like it's a new experience. Your eyes are opening freshly to a problem. What's your process of engaging, continuing, seeing shift and transformation happen look like?
Well, I tend to operate at two levels. A lot of the human rights work and advocacy work. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you operate at the higher level with top lawyers and advice from top lawyers and politicians. Not that you've got very far with the government, but we have very strong people on side in the legal aspect of it. Yep. And then it's very important to be with the people themselves, not just to keep it abstract and academic, but actually to be available for the women themselves. And so many women have come to see me, and as they've cried on my shoulder, and we wept together. And you've got to get the stories from the women as well. And they also need to know that they're not forgotten. You care about them. You're with them. You're doing what you can for them. Haven't had much success so far, but we're fighting the battle for them. Yeah. And it did take, I think, was it 20 years in the UK to get William Wilberforce to abolish slavery? These things do take time, but we just keep on fighting and fighting for gender equality for women in that particular problem area in the UK.
Well, I mean, you're fighting in so many different territories and for so many years. I love that, like, you're talking about fighting from the ground up and also kind of top down, like actually influencing policymakers and laws and trying to get up to where there can be systemic change throughout culture. And in your role where you're present in Parliament and you're actually speaking on behalf of disenfranchised people groups, what is that process like? Have you experienced any sort of the gender inequality gap as a woman speaking, or has the world evolved to the point where it doesn't matter if it's a man speaking or it doesn't matter if it's a woman speaking? I would imagine you probably have experienced something there in your journey.
Well, I don't think I have in the UK. I'm sure there has been in the past, and I think many women of colour may be experiencing it in Parliament. But I've been very fortunate that since I can't believe it, I've been House of Lords since 1983. Can't believe it. It still seems unreal, still nervous. But anyway, I've just found people are immensely courteous, supportive, helpful, and I don't feel any negative gender discrimination.
Beautiful.
If anything, I think sometimes some of the staff are even nicer. So I think that's positive. But I am told that some of the people of colour do experience some discrimination. But
Okay.
I'm very fortunate in that. And I don't think even through life have I felt any gender discrimination. Then I'm lucky, aren't I? You know, I'm in Britain, I'm white, I've managed to get a university degree as a part-time student, I'm a qualified nurse, you know, so I've got a lot of credentials.
Yep.
I mean, they still try and, you know, rubbish me. There was an article in one of our famous English papers called the Daily Telegraph, and it's a few years back. And some people don't like me doing this, and particularly the men don't like it if they like the trivial as it is. And so I do have a few when I'm accused of being Islamophobic, etc. But there's an article in the Daily Telegraph which says, and the heading is very good, they'd love to call me Islamophobic, but I love Muslim women. And I do. So you can't call me Islamophobic. And in our research and our work in Heart, you know, we work with Buddhists in Burma, the Shan Women's Action Network, lovely people. We work with Muslims in Blue Nile State in Sudan. So I love that phrase. Can't remember where it comes from. Ubi Caritas. I think it's maybe a Roman Catholic phrase, but I love it. It's where love is, God is. And you can transcend all the other differences and divides and so on and so forth, just with love. And I think that's so important. And when we're working for people who aren't Christians, we just are there to show Christian love in action. And what a privilege.
That's beautiful. I think there's a lot of desire in culture in my generation to change things from the top down, like to not just approach a problem at the ground level, but to also, like, what would it look like to influence policy, systemic change? Think something like Parliament, that feels like a hallowed ground, like a secret room, you know, like only certain people get in there. What would you say to people, whether they're young and kind of finding their path, or they're already older in a career, about the exchange in that secret room, like what it's like? Because I think we oftentimes don't have much empathy for people that are in those positions of leadership. So I think, you know, you've been going in and out of those rooms for 40 some years now. What would you say to people about the nature of that landscape and what it looks like to have influence there? And I mean, I'm sure we could talk for a long time about that, but.
Well, I think that there are ways of accessing it. I mean, in Britain, I'm not sure there are parallels in the States,
Yeah.
but you always have your own member of parliament. And so one of the very first things that we recommend to people who are having problems is they write to the member of parliament, who can then raise it in parliament, raise it with ministers. If it's that serious, raise it on the floor of the House. So when it always is for members of the House of Commons, there's always a member of parliament. And that's probably the best way in. We in the Lords don't have that, but I think we get known for what we're concerned about. Okay. So I get lots of letters and requests from people who know about my concern for humanitarian aid, who know about my concern for Muslim women, or know about my concern for the countries where we're working. Like at the moment, some of the most explosive and tragic countries in the world. In Burma, I just had an email in this afternoon from someone who's desperate about the situation in Burma, where the military are going out and killing people in villages, and it's just horrific. Or, you know, we know for our work in Sudan or Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, and that's heartbreak. Please pray for the Armenians of Karabakh, because they suffer this huge war inflicted by Azerbaijan. And they've got a whole lot of Armenian prisoners, and there are dreadful pictures of the way they mutilate and torture them. And one of the most awful things is what the Azerbaijan soldiers do, is that they will find a prisoner, take his phone, and then they'll carry out their atrocities, their mutilations, I won't go into the other kind of atrocities, and film it. Then they'll send that back to their families. And I was out there during the war a few months ago, and we didn't witness the atrocities, but we've seen films, first-hand films of them. And then I met the ladies who'd had to flee because Azerbaijan had taken their land and they burned their homes and just had to flee. And they said, dread, look at my phone, what I'm going to see. So there is so much work to be done, but I think it's so important to be with people. I just say that so much, and all of us can be with people. If you have a particular area of concern, whether it's for refugees, whether it's for the dying, whether it's whatever our particular concern may be, or for poor people, or for people suffering from race, or whatever, we can all get alongside. We can all go and be available. And I think that's probably the essential component of being authentic, but also being a comfort to people, that they know you're there. They say so often, thank you for coming. We know we're not forgotten. So I would say to everyone, if you have a concern, you have a passion for a problem, just get alongside some of the people who are suffering. And it gives you two things. One is they know you're there. They know that you care. You're there in love. But also it gives you the authentic story. So you can then tell your member of Congress, or I can say it in the House of Lords, and tell their stories. And that means you're not just reading a book, you're not quoting history, but you are actually telling how it is now. And that is a challenge. So I would say to everyone, do get alongside. I remember once I was in, sorry, it's a bit off piece. Do you mind me going off piece for a moment?
It's great. No, we're good.
I remember once I was in Sudan in the previous war, and you couldn't live in buildings, there weren't any, villages were burnt to the ground, so you lived in tents. And I was sitting outside my tent one evening, temperature 40 degrees, and for some funny reason, my mind went back to how we keep Christmas back in England. And it occurred to me that obviously we celebrate Christmas. I mean, wonderful, God helped us not to become man, etc., etc. But if we move straight from Christmas to New Year's celebrations, and we forget that after Jesus was born, Herod killed all those kids, and we forget the suffering that went alongside it and the evil, then we lose a crucial factor in the equation of Christmas. Then my mind went on to Jesus' death and how when he was on the cross, his mother stood at the foot of the cross and must just have felt so anguished to see her son suffering so much. But at least she was there with him in love and anguish, but there. And it occurred to me that perhaps one of the Christian's callings, it fits what I was just saying, is to maybe attend whatever Calvaries our Lord may call us to attend, to feel as helpless as Mary, but at least to be there in love. And it's not necessarily Calvaries, it's places of suffering, and to work with heart, it's places in war zones, or slaves and rescued slaves, but to be alongside and to be there maybe feeling useless and helpless, but to be there in love. And so many people say the fact you were there made all the difference. So that maybe is a thought that comes from our discussion.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And it sounds like, I mean, I've talked to you multiple times about this, but yeah, it just sounds like that proximity is like fuel, right? Like it's strength for your heart. It's courage because you're actually experiencing what other people are experiencing. It's not a theory, right?
And sometimes you feel so impotent. I remember that one of the first times you visited Burma, when the war was going on, as it is now, sadly, in Karen state in Burma. And to cut a long story short, before I went, I had a huge crisis of confidence. I thought, if we're going to visit the Karen, their needs are legion. All we've got to offer is so little. Are we going to raise expectations we can't fulfill? And I've had a real crisis of confidence. And we crossed the Moy and the Swaneen rivers into Karen state in Burma. We climbed Sleeping Dog Mountain. And boy, that was hard work. Sort of 3 steps up and 2 back, clinging onto jungle vegetation. And I was out of breath. And I was saying to myself, Caroline Cox, your grandmother of 6 grandchildren, it's 10 now. But didn't think it's about time you grew up. And you just stopped coming on these ridiculous missions. Then we had to run bent double across the mountain ridge because there was a Burmese army on the next ridge. Then we met the Karen people. And it was just so moving. They just came up and they hugged us and they said, thank you so much for coming. The fact you're here is all that matters. Wouldn't matter if you didn't bring anything. The fact you are here is all that matters. We know we're not forgotten. And then, that rather reassured me how little we had to offer relative to their needs. But 15 years later, there was a young Karen girl giving a presentation for your party parliamentary group on Burma. And I went up to her after and said, sorry, that was brilliant. Congratulations. I said, which part of Karen state did you come from? And she said, I came from Manipur, which is a little village, beautiful, at the bottom of a wretched Sleeping Dog Mountain. So I said to her, oh, I remember Manipur. And I remember I got back to Britain and I heard the Burmese army had taken it and destroyed it. I wept. And she said, well, of course I know you went to Manipur. That was the day you climbed Sleeping Dog Mountain. And that gave such joy to every Karen person in Karen state and in diaspora. So I think the fact of alongside people, you feel inadequate, but it means so much to them.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So, well, I think it's just a huge privilege. And I think going back to the, what we were talking about earlier about gender discrimination and so on, I think maybe, as a woman, one can relate to women. Particularly, I mean, we relate to men in Karen state or what have you. But for some of the women, the Muslim women who are suffering, you could just have big hugs and, just show love. And I think that helps to soften the pain of gender inequality.
It's interesting to me. I mean, in my landscape, my world, a much smaller world than the world that you're, I mean, we live in the same world, but I think you're going out further into the corners of the world than I am currently.
You're even just over half my age. You've got plenty of decades to come.
Okay, that's good. I've achieved that. But it's interesting to me how many women are showing up. So in the mission that I'm pushing on with Justice Collective, the Lord gave us a vision. In the very early days, I saw that picture. It's an American image that was kind of the marketing during World War II. There was an image of a woman with a bandana around her head, like, we can do it. So again, it's an American image, but it was all about like, we're vital to the campaign, to the fight. And so I had that image as I was praying into things around justice and the church and how the church is showing up on behalf of those that are suffering around the world. And it's really worked out that way. There are just a lot of women that really are the key pieces, that are the fighters, that are the champions, that are like the new Carolyn Coxes that are emerging in the world. It's just a lot of females. And I think it comes back to that element of like what a woman naturally carries: compassion, empathy, feeling. They're so much more moved. I think men, well, we just need to get our hearts worked on, maybe. I don't know. I celebrate women. I champion women. I'm very thankful for men and women, but it is interesting to me how many women are they're really responsive to this kind of call. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, but
I think yes and no. I mean, I think obviously there are differences in function, differences in physiology and everything else, and men can do a lot of traveling. Is much harder for women, etc., etc. But and men very often fulfill their own vocations in their own way, which have a slightly more masculine input. But I don't go along with you at all when you say men don't have compassion and men don't have the feelings that women have. I mean, I've worked with men who have been inspirational in their compassion. Yeah. And I think it's just a question of manifesting it in ways that, it may not be exactly the same as women do, but I've certainly seen it work. So I think it's a complementarity rather than a yay, no. I think they're just different ways, but they complement each other.
Yeah, that's a good
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I accept that. That's a great word. It's very true.
Yeah, and it's exciting.
I do pray for the example that, at least in my environment, that many women are setting of showing up and engaging, that would spread to more and more males in my environment. So.
Well, it's wonderful to share the enthusiasm. You know the meaning of the word enthusiasm? I love it. God in us.
Wow, I did not know that.
We share the enthusiasm. And God calls each of us to manifest it in different ways. And for women, there'll be different contexts and ways for it to manifest it, but men similarly do. Yes. And it's a wonderful complementarity.
It's good.
It's great to share that.
I love it. Mm-hmm. Anything else any parting thoughts? I don't know if you want to share what's been on your mind recently, things you've been thinking about. Sounds like you're still very active in similar places of the world.
Yeah, and well, some have deteriorated. The place I would especially ask you to pray for would include Nigeria. The US may be better than the UK, letting it be known what's happening in Nigeria, but thousands of Christians have been killed, thousands. BBC doesn't cover it. UK government doesn't recognise it. They say it's just tit for tat between Christians and, well, I'm sorry it isn't. And the atrocities which have been there and which I've witnessed are not tit for tat at all. Just one little story for you to pray about, because I could repeat it many times. But Boko Haram you may well have heard about, and that's the north. Middle belt, sort of Joss and Plateau State and so on. The Islamist Fulani, not all Fulani are herders, but the ones who've been radicalized and are Islamist. They've been perpetrating the most horrendous attacks on Christian villages and so on. And I remember I visited one village, and this lady came up to me, and she was absolutely, distraught. Because when the Fulani attacked their village, she tried to run away, a little 6-year-old girl, and she was surrounded by more Islamist Fulanis, and they attacked her with a machete or small scars. And then they said, your daughter would love to suck her mother's finger. They cut her finger off, she passed out, and when she came round, the little 6-year-old daughter was dead next to her with her mother's finger stuck in her mouth. Now, this is evil, big time. It means so much to be there. We just hugged and we wept together, and as you feel, you're not doing much, but you've got to be, it's a bit like, attend whatever Calvaries our Lord may call us to attend. They may not be genuine Calvaries, but to be alongside people who are suffering. And I would perhaps make that, and if you're going to go into the political arena, which I didn't choose but was landed in by God's sense of humour, but it is really important. Yes, be at the top levels, what you're saying, going on in those rooms, you've got to be there for that. But bring into that the reality of people who are suffering, the reality of the situation, by having been with the people in the reality. And then you can speak with authenticity. And I'm told that when I do speak in Parliament, the House does listen, because they know I've been there. I'm not just reading a Human Rights Watch report or an Amnesty International report, but you've been there and got photographs to show how it really is. It also means so much to the people that you are there, and they remember it and don't forget it. So I think that might be a message, for women and men. If you want to help people who are suffering in whatever arena, if you're going to go into political or legal arenas, then at least spend some time with the people for whom you're working.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense, and we need to hear that. And it's duly noted. Is there anything that if anybody's watching this session, anything that people can do, whether it's following your work online, social media, if people want to, even contact Heart, is there a way for people to do that?
Yeah, I can send to you. I can't put it up here because I don't have it on the screen, but you can make it available. Our website and my email.
Yeah. And
delighted to be in touch. Anyone who's interested and wants to share the pain and the passion.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, that's heart-uk.org.
There's lowercase. It's Caroline, that's me, Caroline, .Cox, COX, at heart, HART, stands for Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust, heart-uk.org. Yep. Caroline.Cox at heart-uk.org.
Yep, and they also have an Instagram that's also Heart UK. So you guys can connect with their work, and what Carolyn's doing and her team it's very necessary. A large footprint. They're in a lot of countries of the world, bringing strength. They have local partners on the ground that are building beautiful work. So, well, it's always a pleasure, Carolyn. I always feel refreshed, and again, an honor to speak with you. Thank you for the example you've set for us, and my prayer is that there'll be many more Carolyn Coxes being raised up in this generation all over the world and in their different spaces and territories. And thanks for the example you've set for us. We love you.
Well, thank you for the privilege of sharing the pain and the passion with you. I love you and I respect you, and I respect your wonderful place, institution, and you've got wonderful people there. I'll never forget their response and their generosity and their sincerity. So thank you for being you. And thank you for the wonderful work you do and your own ministry. So thanks be to God.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn.
Okay, well, be in touch. And later on when you can travel, if anyone comes over to London, we'd have to welcome them.
That sounds good. We'll definitely we'll hold you to that. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, lovely to be with you, and thanks for the privilege. It really is a privilege. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much. I
God-
feel very blessed.
God bless you.
God bless you too. Bye-bye and God bless.